Hello, and thank you for joining us on this Tag1 Team Talk, the official podcast and vlog series of Tag1 Consulting. In this episode, we're excited to discuss the Drupal Sustainability Project, which addresses the environmental and economic impact on the Drupal ecosystem. Additionally, we will highlight Gander, Tag1's automated performance testing framework for Drupal and how it helps drive Drupal sustainability goals. Tag1 is the #2 all-time contributor to Drupal. We build large-scale web applications for Drupal, as well as many other technologies for Global 500s and organizations in nearly every business sector, including Google, the New York Times, the European Union, the University of Michigan, and the Linux Foundation, to name a few. I'm Mariano Crivello, and I'm based out of Kaloha, Hawaii. And today I'm joined by Mike Gifford. I think you're out of South France today. Normally
That's
he's
right.
based out of Ottawa, Canada. Senior strategist at Civic Actions, maintainer of the Drupal Sustainability Initiative, Drupal's core accessibility maintainer. And then we're also joined by Tim Lehnen, the chief technology of the Drupal Association, who's based out of Portland, Oregon. And of course, our favorite, Michael Meyers here at Tag1, is based out of New York City. Welcome, gentlemen,
Thanks. It's
to
good
our
to be here.
podcast.
Thank you.
So we'll kick it off pretty quickly here. We don't want to take up too much of people's time, but I definitely want to get a lot of this great information out. Hey, Mike, what is sustainability?
So we live on a finite planet, and as part of that, we have to go off and think about what our impact is on the planet. And there are 8 billion of us, and we are living in an increasingly industrial world. And so much of our lives has an impact on the environment. We understand that cars and airplanes are impacting CO2, but people don't necessarily realize that their computers and the internet is also contributing to CO2. In fact, if you look at the industry, if you compare the airline industry to the ICT industry, our digital industry, they have about a comparable CO2 contribution, and yet
Amazing.
the ICT industry is growing exponentially, and we know that there's more and more people who are engaging with digital tools, whether that's through artificial intelligence or virtual reality, and we've been growing on an exponential path, and that each of those electrons that we're passing around has an environmental footprint, whether that's from powering the computers or cooling the data centers, or storing the bits or in our hard drives. So there's a huge impact that happens through our digital lives, but people don't see it. Does that
That's
make
true.
sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think, we all in the back of our heads are thinking about, hey, this electricity is coming from somewhere, and it's probably more than likely coming from a coal plant, from what I understand. So with that being said, how are other technologies and communities thinking about this in your experience?
Well, there's been a huge movement and awareness around this thinking about sustainability. I've been involved in it since the UNCED conference in '92, so I've been thinking about these issues for quite some time. But in terms of legislation, particularly looking at CO2, and that will affect our industry, two pieces of legislation are worth thinking about. One is Europeans are organizing a climate change act that is sort of like the GDPR, but will be focused more on the environmental impact of digital technologies. There's also California has legislation that's impacting companies that have more than $1 billion in assets, or not assets, in revenue, will be asked to do additional scope 3 evaluations, which will affect a lot of people, because if you have IBM as a client, and you suddenly need to if IBM's doing scope 3 analysis, that they need to know from all of their customers what the environmental impact is. So there's been this movement around environmental social government and policies around the SEC, and trying to go off and to make efforts to push companies to have better governance structures and have better environmental policies. But this is definitely changing over time. In the hosting space, Google and Microsoft have really done amazingly well. Amazon's pretty good, but they're definitely the two leads really are Microsoft and Google in terms of the cloud hosting environments. Also, I'm really happy to report that Platform SH has done a great deal of work around how to try and assess their impact as a Drupal hosting provider. And as a platform that is like they've hired a climate scientist, they've brought in third-party auditors to go off and to evaluate their services. They're making a lot of this public and sort of presenting their findings as a way to go off and to highlight the best practices that they are finding in hosting. So that's some of the stuff that they're doing. Also need to touch on the Green Software Foundation and the Green Web Foundation. They definitely work in conjunction with each other. There's definitely a lot of collaboration between the two. There's a really great podcast called Environment Variables. That's a co-hosted podcast. So that's definitely something to look at. I also want to note that there's environment tracks that different conferences, particularly a lot of conferences are starting to have an environmental track to try and think about what their impact is and to try and rally their community around that. So it was at FOSDEM and the State of Open earlier this year, in 2023. And they both of them had an environmental track. So it's really encouraging to see this sort of focus in the open source community. Also wanted to highlight that Wagtail CMS is doing some work around trying to hone in and say, what is our impact? How do we evaluate what our CO2 impact for our open source CMS? And how do we try and provide a sustainability statement that's got some teeth in it for their community that can be a rallying point behind that. So again, that was lovely to see. The word stuff, trying to structure their community to try and think more around sustainability, and they've got a lot of people engaged in that, so that's great. And finally, just wanted to highlight that there's the web sustainability guidelines, where there's a draft document now that was put out by a WC3 community group that's really trying to highlight some of the best practices for digital sustainability. We basically wanted to take what WCAG did for accessibility, that over to sustainability, to try and hard code and document those best practices so that people who are caring about this and who want to go off and to demonstrate that they are implementing best practices on digital sustainability, they know what to do and how to go off and proceed with the points. So I think that covers most of what's happening in the environment in a very smashed together kind of format. But
I want to jump in here and credit Mike a little bit with some other things here, because I would have to say that probably I've been with the Drupal Association for 9, going on 10 years, and in the community for like 17. And I think one of the first people in the wider community that I had a conversation with was Mike, and back in 2014,
wow,
talking about these issues,
right?
and these kinds of things that we should talk about. I mean, that's nothing compared to talking about it back in '92. But I think it reflects a kind of level of commitment and a kind of level of passion that we see in all sorts of areas in our open source projects, right? And so we build a level of enthusiasm about a problem to solve, usually a technology problem, but oftentimes we realize ways that the technology can be used to solve wider problems, environmental ones, social ones, things like that. And I think as we talk more about what we're inspired to do here, I think that'll kind of come into play. So I think it'll be really interesting. And I think, Mike, you were introduced as the accessibility maintainer, but it's not impossible to think that Drupal will have a environmental sustainability maintainer eventually, and your name might come up. So we'll see how this goes.
That'd be very interesting. Thank you very much, Tim.
Yeah, that's a great segue into let's talk about the Drupal sustainability project or initiative. I'll let you take the lead there.
Yeah.
Mike.
So I'll start this off just saying that there's been a number of different efforts to try and think about the Drupal sustainability. The Drupal conferences have had a long effort to try and be sustainable and to think about what their environmental impact is. That's something that's being part of Drupal Drupal constants. I can remember going to them. There's certainly been an effort to care about the planet and the people who are going to these events. And there's also Tim and I were involved in creating a sustainability, about a sustainability page for Drupal. So trying to make sure that there's if you go to about under sustainability, you can find
We'll have the
there's
links in the podcast in the
yeah,
show notes here. Yeah, definitely.
thank you.
Mhm.
We've also added a sustainability tag within Drupal. So if you're in any project or
Nice.
issue, there's a recognized tag to go off into to highlight issues that have sustainability issues that we want to focus in on. And what else? We've also created a project within Drupal.org that's looking on sustainability, and that has a number of other stubs for other initiatives. Like if we want to go off and it's more of a placeholder, and it's been wonderful to go off and collaborate with Gus on this, trying to go off and to create a space for the community to think about how we might want to be more organized and structured around how we focus in on our sustainability efforts.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was just going to ask who are some of the other stakeholders here? You mentioned Gus, and I guess who else is involved?
I mean, there's definitely people who are involved in the Slack channel, but we haven't really formalized a cohesive group at this point, and so
for
there's
example, there isn't a formal working group with a charter yet, even though
no,
there is that sustainability statement, and I think that would be a good next step.
for
And then
sure.
there's kind of institutional stakeholders as well, right? So the Drupal Association, to a degree, is a stakeholder, the DrupalCon organizers underneath the DA. But one of the things that I think we want to talk about is this notion, like with a number of our other open source initiatives, of bringing in more stakeholders, recruiting people, creating a little bit of a more formal process, and in particular, finding a way that it's hard to make an initiative successful if it is a afterthought or a follow along or a thing you do if you have extra time,
Mhm.
as opposed to an initiative that's built in sort of to the foundation of the way you operate on a regular basis.
And
And
the
so,
culture too, right? Like so much
yeah,
of what has made accessibility successful in Drupal is being that there's been support from the leadership on down around accessibility, and people understand that as part of our conferences, it's part of our code. It is a bug, it is not a feature, and that this is something that we've embraced as a community. And the same kind of thing needs to happen with sustainability.
yeah,
Right.
I'd say that's very true. And I'll dwell for a second on sort of the DrupalCon announcement, because one of the things that's it's just a good example, is that and this has happened across the events industry eventually, but the Drupal Association and DrupalCon was fairly early in this, starting to require environmental sustainability clauses in contract negotiations with hotels and conference centers, is something that takes some effort to spin up at first, to learn some best practices, and then is built into an ongoing process, becomes a part of just what you do with every
Mhm.
contract negotiation and every renewal, and actually becomes much easier once you sort of establish that for the first time. And that's a physical world meet space example, but that same sort of integration into process is something that will be successful on the technology side as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have appreciated the more environmentally conscious Drupal camps that I've attended over the years. I think I have some reusable dinnerware from a bad camp a number of years back that sits in my backpack and travels around with me. And
Yeah, yep.
it's those little small wins that I think go a long way. So yeah, happy to see that we're really thinking about this for the events in the Drupal community, because obviously that has a pretty big impact. So I kind of wanted to go quickly back to sounds kind of funny, but there's an actual issue tag for this sustainability in Drupal. Like, what triggers a sustainability issue tag in your opinion, both of you gentlemen?
Well, I mean, ultimately, it should be something that's not just a performance issue. There's also a performance tag. It would be nice if there was something that was tied to either if we can, yeah, there's a close tie between performance and sustainability. But I think that ultimately it comes down to how do you try and maximize the overall running of the process. If you're thinking about the not necessarily optimization of the server, but the optimization of the broader holistic puzzle. So what is the runtime on the client as well as on the server? That's, I think, something that would be much more of an issue around sustainability, because our servers are probably fairly optimized for energy efficiency, where our desktops are not. And if we just sort of throw a whole bunch of JavaScript out there, it doesn't cause any real problem on the server to go off and have massive JavaScript files, but it does on the client. And so if you have an 8 MB JavaScript file, which some organizations have had, that will have a terrible load time and a huge carbon impact because of the hundreds and thousands of machines that are running that.
Right,
Yeah.
or even millions, right? So for
Mhm.
some of the larger websites, that could be a factor of
And
impact.
there's a almost a mindset component as well, in terms of, if you're doing sort of an analysis of a process, you might say, oh, this is an extremely efficient process. It happens in less than a millisecond. It's done, maybe it's done when a node is loaded, or whatever it might be. You're super satisfied with how you've diagrammed this out. And then the sustainability question might be, does that even need to happen at all, right? Is there a
Right.
way we could not even do it in the first place, instead of doing it and making it very fast? Right. There's a little bit of just a difference in the way that you think about it. I would also say that tag is in use right now for larger brainstorming about, like, sort of policy questions almost, or sort of this initial community rallying effort to be like, should we be talking about, that tag might come up in a DrupalCamp project, in a DrupalCon project. It might come up in the governance issue queue when we're talking about, hey, should we have any governance related to sustainability, all sorts of things. So it can be as much for policy issues as for code issues. So
I like it. Yeah, definitely. I can already start to imagine this being used almost immediately, knowing the Drupal community. Great. Tim, how is the Drupal Association supporting this effort?
that's a really good question, and it has multiple facets to the answer. So we already talked about DrupalCon, for example, where we're trying to do our part within a program that we already operate to try and make it environmentally sustainable as much as we can. But then there's the, how can we support the efforts that aren't off the ground yet, right? So what is the Drupal Association's role, and what do we do, right? We're a 501c3 nonprofit, strictly speaking, an educational nonprofit. We're not an environmental nonprofit, strictly speaking, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a huge impact on this space, because we have, first and foremost, a huge spotlight to shine on issues of importance to the Drupal community, right? If the Drupal Association says, hey, this is something that is important to us, we can be part of making sure it's on the keynote stage at DrupalCon, and that the developer audience hears that message. We can be part of making sure that there are case studies and blog posts publicly made. We can do all sorts of things along those lines. Secondly, one of our primary functions is to provide infrastructure for the Drupal community and for the actual development of Drupal, right? We host a lot of servers. We pay a big bill every month for all the CI testing, for all of the different things that people do, so our community can collaborate together. And so the things that we do with those systems and ways we can improve their sustainability is an important question. And we can also figure out how to collaborate with energized folks within the community, folks like Mike and others, who say, hey, wait a minute, we could make something like a sustainability commitment, or we could participate in this pledge, or we could do X, Y, and Z, and not exactly sort of give permission. It's open source. People can come in and do these things, but we can kind of boost and encourage and endorse efforts like that to give them that little bit of extra energy. So that's definitely a big thing and a big conversation. And we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the technical things that we're bringing that can impact all of the Drupal sites out there and the way we develop code. That'll be in our sort of Gander conversation.
Yeah,
But we can also
actually,
talk about the other tools.
yeah, I was just actually, you kind of brought up a good point. Like I didn't really think about this till right now, that, sustainability and economic impact kind of go hand in hand, or they correlate really well in the digital space, right? If we are doing something that is more sustainable, it naturally, I would think it has a better economic profile for those that are deploying applications, building applications, et cetera. Whereas it might not be the case in other industries where they, going green costs them more money initially. I think in our space, we have a kind of a quick reward of, like, if we focus on sustainability, we're actually it's going to be better.
In most cases, again, in most cases, partly because of the tight coupling of improved performance and sustainability issues, but in several other areas, yeah, there's actually hopefully a reduction in your costs to start doing this, as long as you're thinking about vendor selection, as long as you're thinking about who you're talking to. Speaking of that, I can talk a little bit about how Drupal.org itself is hosted and our tools.
Yeah.
And so we basically have two major hosting providers that we use right now. One is the first host for the Drupal project that was outside of Dries' dorm room, which was when we moved into the Oregon State University open source lab. And so we actually still have server infrastructure there.
Wow.
It's now maybe 30% of the total infrastructure we run is what lives over there. And we're in physical rack space next to some other open source projects that you've definitely heard of, that are all in the same place and all got hosted by this wonderful organization. And student-run data center, educational opportunities, all these things. In terms of understanding our carbon footprint there and with them, it's really based on that university's overall carbon commitment. So unfortunately, we don't have numbers to measure what the particular carbon ratio of that data center is. The university does publish some overall numbers about their carbon reduction and carbon action plan. So if you're interested, the Sustainability at OSU page talks about this, and they're working on a 50% reduction in carbon emissions in the next couple of years is their current goal, and they have a publication about what they've been doing there.
It's also worth noting that it's in Oregon, I imagine, which has one of the greenest energy supplies in the United States.
So we have a lot of hydroelectric, a lot of wind power, where there's not too much energy coming from non-green sources. So that certainly helps quite a bit. And that actually relates to the other now bulk of our hosting, which is on AWS, which you'll note was not on Mike's list of the best of the big three of the hosting providers. And that's completely fair. I think we're not here for, at the time we made this decision, we made it a technical one years ago. But what we do have is data center selection. And so similar to what Mike just said, where these data centers live can often affect the ratio of green energy being used. And you may not know this, but a lot of people out there probably do deploy things on AWS, and the US West region that you see a lot of things deployed in is actually also primarily Oregon and primarily hydro-powered data centers. And so they do provide as a tool a carbon calculator for what you're hosting on AWS. So they have some portion of renewables. And according to this, as of next month, this is January 2024. I can't believe it's that close. We should be at or near like 98 to 100% renewable on our instances with them. So
that's great.
Wow.
Yeah, it's good news. So that's an estimated usage of something like these carbon metrics are so hard to remember. I won't get too scientific. It's like the 30 million ton carbon offsets, whatever measure in a year is about what the DA uses, about 30 of those carbon units. And we have about 2 left this year that were not on their renewables. So doing pretty good, getting there.
So you're telling me there's going to be a dashboard in the future that tells us what the carbon footprint of the Drupal project would be?
I think it would actually be a really interesting idea. Mike mentioned the Wagtail example. They're a community that actually tries to do this. They try and publish the carbon impact of all the sites out there. We don't have enough access to the end user data, but there is a proposed telemetry initiative to start sending back some more information to Drupal.org so that we could know a little bit more. And perhaps when that initiative gets more attention and more steam, one of the metrics we could consider are metrics that would let us measure that sustainability. That would be pretty cool. And then we'd be able to gather some more of that information. But yeah.
It's also worth noting that Drupal is more than just the software and the sites that we run. The Drupal community has a huge impact on the web sphere in general, and on certainly in the PHP community, contributing a lot of stuff back to that environment. So if we're able to take a focus in on this and start writing material and make it a priority for our community, it will radiate out into other smaller open source communities and indeed proprietary communities as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. It helps template it for them when they're looking to adopt some of these best practices. Well, I'm definitely excited to learn more about this. I'm learning a lot on this podcast, so thank you. I appreciate it. Tim, you talked about kind of like the actual infrastructure that's used to run all of this. How can the Drupal community help support sustainability initiative? Like, how do we, as Drupal community members, jump in? Is it just throwing a hashtag on anything that we see that's poorly performing, or
Well,
what do we
I
need to do?
mean, it's better than nothing, but no, I mean, I think
Sure.
there's a few things that we need to do. I think we're at a place right now where we do need to find and recruit folks whose not just they themselves have an interest in this topic, but whose employers are willing to fund some of that time to let them work on this, right? I think across the Drupal community, something like 70% of contributions are sponsored, and a lot of that sponsored time is spent on bug fixing and features and things like that. But we could absolutely use someone to sponsor a sustainability maintainer and things like that, right? That would be amazing. But also, so I think we need some people to just provide some more time to think about these issues. But also, I think we could use a group coming together to create a little bit of a roadmap of what we want to do. Because like I said, you can do a lot of smaller one-off sustainability initiatives, kind of follow after initiatives. But if we could come up with a way of like our top targets of things that would create something that is integrated into ongoing development of Drupal and becomes a fundamental part of the process, I think that would be really good. And that gets us into, I think, this performance conversation that I think we want to talk about.
Just before we jump to that, there's also on Drupal.org, sorry, not on the Drupal Slack channel rather, we have the sustainability team channel, which is worth calling out.
Oh, yes,
Please
yes.
join that Slack channel. That's the main place where you're going to engage with other people who are interested in sustainability, and you'll get updates there more than anywhere else. And also take a look at the web sustainability guidelines and the website sustainablewebdesign.org, which is a more user-friendly version of the sustainable web guidelines. Both of those things are quite useful. The more you can educate yourself about the issues and what to look for and what the problems are and what the best practices are, the better you're going to be. There's just so much work being done on this right now, but the web is digital sustainability is basically where web accessibility was 20 years ago. And we don't have 20 years, we don't have two decades to sort of get to the point where web accessibility is now. We need to go off and to quickly accelerate this to a conversation that isn't happening around in tech communities, to something that people understand and are acting on.
Do I see a new sustainability badge in Drupal.org's future? We can put these on our profiles, on our projects.
Yeah, on our hosting companies. I mean, might be a great
companies.
Yeah,
Cool.
That's great.
Yeah, so one of the things I definitely want to talk about, because I think there's a direct correlation. We've alluded to it a couple times here, is performance, right? Like we've heard about this web performance. What is performance? What is web performance? Why is it important? I think for us that are developers, have been working with Drupal, especially Drupal at larger scale. Typically, it means reducing things like PHP runtime, reducing the number of database calls. Dare I say caching, because caching is probably the most important thing that you can do to make a website fast, right? But I think even outside of caching, just making sure, like you had pointed out earlier, Mike, that like, hey, your front end, this thing that we don't necessarily think about until it's a problem, is actually creating a lot of carbon impact, because all of the users that are using the website are burning resources, whether they're on green energy or not, depends on where you're at. And some of us live off grid. I'm not 100% off grid yet, but hopefully by this time next year I will be. It's one of my goals.
Nice.
So, but I think in general, having that kind of thought process, having the ability to even identify where those problems are, as opposed to something being reactive, being more proactive about that. I think we definitely want to talk about something that Tag1's been working on with the Google Chrome team. And I'll let Michael introduce that here in a second. But I think just in general, like, what are your thoughts on performance, and like, how do we as a Drupal project get better at making Drupal more performant?
Yeah, so before Michael jumps in, what I wanted to say on this front in general is Drupal actually has a pretty strong reputation for being able to create really highly performant, really scalable sites, right? This is something we've been good at for a long time. In the early days, it wasn't necessarily out of the box, but more recently, things like big pipe innovations and other things, like it's gotten easier and easier to be highly performant and highly scalable. A fellow Tag1 person famously wrote one of the first books on high performance Drupal and all of these things. And so like this has been out there, but interestingly enough, we have for a long time not necessarily been able to, or not in an automated way, been able to prove it and show it and demonstrate it in everything that we do. And the Drupal Association was approached by the Google Chrome team, who was really interested in performance issues, both as they relate to like the experience of the web for end users, particularly for end users in developing nations where the connections are slower and things like that, but also in the sustainability side of the equation. And they said like, okay, we're working with a variety of CMSs because the CMS industry together is at least 50% of the web. And the open source CMS industry in particular. And different communities and different CMSs have different problem spaces. And okay, Drupal's really good at some of these performance things. It's maybe not so good at some of these other things. But what do you think we could work on together? And we worked on a few projects, but ultimately we started working, we kind of introduced some of the Chrome team to you all over at the Tag1 side, and came up with some cool ideas. So Michael, I think that's kind of the original genesis of where this Gander idea came from, and maybe you can take it from there and explain this cool thing that we're putting together.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting approach, right? If we can attack the open web at a platform level and make massive improvements or even just small improvements to a CMS like WordPress, it has an outsized impact on the internet as a whole. Drupal powers something like 6, 7, 8% of the top 10,000 websites. It's a lot of traffic. When we first collaborated with the Chrome team, we made specific changes to Drupal core, right? We wanted to improve lazy loading. We focused more on like features and capabilities that you could just turn on and make your sites faster. But what we quickly realized was that when people build on top of Drupal, they tend to decrease performance. And that includes the Drupal community. Like when we as contributors to Drupal make Drupal core contributed modules over time, we tend to impact performance. And it's not something that we have paid as close attention to as we should, because we're short on time and resources. And I think whether you're a company or an open source Drupal developer, unless it's a glaring problem, it's something you just tend not to be aware of. And so we thought, well, what if we built an automated performance testing system that could monitor Drupal's performance as changes are introduced? We could catch them sooner, which means it's easier to fix them, right? The benefit and beauty of automation in the development cycle. And it'll free up, time for folks like Alex Pott and the individuals that are doing this testing right now that, are, precious commodities in the community. So it gives them more time, makes Drupal faster. And our hope is that over time, organizations using Drupal will adopt this system. It's an open source platform. Currently, it's integrated into the Drupal QA system. And so this is another great example. Tim, you talked earlier about how can the DA be a force multiplier? Well, by taking this, open source platform and plugging it into the QA system, we can run it on every commit to Drupal core. Right now we're running it, in sort of like an MVP capacity. We just announced it at DrupalCon Lille, and it runs every couple of hours. But our goal is to get to the point where, just like the QA system, it runs on every commit or every merge request, and we evaluate the performance criteria. And I didn't know this, but apparently, one of the things I learned in doing the Gander project is that there is an existing performance contract in Drupal that we just don't enforce. That
You mean in terms of the contribution process and the kind of community gates for new feature development and so on?
Yeah, I never knew that technically speaking, when you introduce a new feature to Drupal, it has to meet certain performance requirements, and we don't really, it's not really enforced,
It's so
99%
hard to
of the
do.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So this, for the first time, we now have a report that can say, hey, your change had, this impact, and we can make a business decision. Do we want to, allow this change to happen, or do we want to revise the approach to increase it? And, while, the primary goal of this system was increasing the end user experience, it's sort of like people contribute to open source out of self-interest, right? You do something to make the platform better, you scratch an itch. I don't, and earlier you talked about the quick ROI on these kinds of things. It's pretty amazing, right? By making sites faster, Google has proven through tons of research that you improve the end user experience, which leads to more page views, which leads to more revenue, more time on site. Like, the benefits are insane. It's amazing. It's like, why isn't performance a focus of every organization? And then, all the way down to the end user device, which you talked about earlier, Mike, like, it'd be great if my, phone didn't have to process as much because my battery would last longer, right?
That's right.
And so, like, I'm making more money, my battery lasts longer, and I have a better environmental impact. I mean, it's like, just win, win, win down the line. And so, performance and scalability is the goal of Gander, and making, Drupal the fastest CMS out there, out of the box, and ensuring that you keep it fast when you develop on top of it. But, the sustainability impact, is huge. And, Mariano, you're working on a blog post that probably come out early next year. We wanted to do a calculator, right? Like, if we make Drupal, 200 milliseconds faster, what does that impact have? And it's, we can contrive an example for context just to paint a picture, but it's, surprising how much data and information you need that you just don't have access to right now to really calculate and understand these things. And so the idea of, Amazon having, renewable energy information, and the DA saying, here's our footprint, like, I could totally see how, in a few years even, you could programmatically determine the, the environmental impact of your code, of your application. And that'd be amazing.
Even down to the request. Yeah, I think. Yeah. Go ahead.
The one thing to think about is just that anytime any process on a digital it's the scalability, right? You've got, you're loading one web page, that, like, how much CO2 is involved in that? Not very much. But if you have 1 million websites and they're being run, each one of them has 10 million page views, I mean, that's a little bit much for every, but like
a highly traffic website.
It does escalate quite quickly, and so any little changes can make a huge deal.
Yeah, it's really impressive.
Yeah, I was going to say a single change can have, many factors of impact on its carbon footprint ultimately. And I think that's the kind of the correlation we're trying to make here, is that, if we make things faster, we do reduce the overall amount of resources consumed. That's more sustainable in our approach. And I think, pointing out the fact that, like, look, with the Gander project, it's really about creating and exposing something that, sure, you could build something to have that type of visibility, but it wasn't standardized. And I think the idea here is that we're standardizing something that people are seeing used in the Drupal core project, and then they can actually extend it and bring it into their own project. Has a really big impact. I think some of the early wins would be some of the other, really popular distributions and themes and modules that are being used out there. They could start to implement this in their project. It starts to have a really big kind of cascade effect on its impact.
And your point you've just made goes to something I said really early on, which is the the advantage of the way that we're integrating Gander into the CI system for Drupal, into this testing system, is that it's fundamental to the process. It becomes something that's always included, always checked for, not something you have to run as a manual test, not something that you need some particular owner, very passionate single volunteer to work a bunch of evening and weekend hours, and when they go away, the project doesn't care anymore. It's systematized. It's a strong technological solution, and that gives us scalability, not just in the performance sense, but scalability in the like community effort to make an impact here. So I think it's a really great example of that, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it, be extended to that every merge request and then adopted by these other things. And I think it's really, we shouldn't underestimate the impact it would have in end user adoption as well. I think it would be a really cool thing to see a part of the standard best practice. We've all seen these. You define a deployment, your sort of CI dev stage prod pipeline for a client project, right? Not for us as developers. And seeing the standard best practice diagram of that's presented all over the web, including here's your performance and sustainability check step in your pipeline that all these pipelines should have, like that would be a huge win for the web and for the planet. So
yeah, I think we just playing critical thinker here. We've also got to be careful that we don't want to turn this on every single commit, right? We want to just use it when we're ready for a release candidate or something along those lines. It's one of those things that we pull together and say, okay, this is one of those checks that we pass before we make a release. And if we're seeing a regression or a negative trend, that we're aware of it. And I think that's the big takeaway here, is that we're creating visibility that really didn't exist there before, or we could create that visibility, but it required a lot of resources and technical know-how. This is allowing this to be a little bit more turnkey, a little bit more accessible for the community to start implementing with their project. And I think that's huge. Really excited to see this move forward. Well, I don't want to take up too much time here. I know we've been talking. We've covered a lot of great topics. There's been a lot of links that we will definitely make sure that we put down in the show notes, if you will. We talked a little bit about participation, but I want to rehash this again. Like, how do we participate? How do we get involved in the sustainability project one more time? And then anything closing that you all want to mention before we stop the recording?
I'll jump real quick, which is just that. I encourage you to do what people in Drupal and in the open source community do best, which is begin to coalesce and self-organize with the other interested people to move this forward. As Mike said, the sustainability team channel in Drupal Slack is a great place for the regular meetings, the real-time communication, the way to introduce yourself to some of these other folks. The drupal.org/about/sustainability page also has really great information about our commitments as a project that we've made so far and future things that we want to do. And also, if you are another organization and you have an idea similar to this one, developed by the Tag1 team about how, hey, Drupal as a whole could be improved by 3 percentage points, 20 percentage points, whatever, if we did X, and the DA would just put it in their infrastructure, let me know. Reach out to me directly at the Drupal Association. You can find me on the association staff page and let me know that idea, and we'll see if we can empower you to bring that to the community. So those would be my suggestions, but I'll pass it to Mike for his comments as well.
I would definitely encourage people to check out Gander, because it is a really interesting project, and ways to try and how do you incorporate the work that's being done by the Tag1 team into your project. There's also a group called climateaction.tech that has another great Slack channel. There's also a magazine called Branch that's really quite good, that has a lot of useful resources in that as well. But I mean, learning more about this is such a huge part of it, because people are not familiar with it. And particularly not just looking at the environmental impact of the system when you're running it. We don't think about the embedded carbon of the systems, and so much more so many more people are thinking about how do we try and extend the lives of our machines so that they can serve us better without having to cost the planet in terms of the production and the disposal of the devices. So there's a lot to learn in this space, and ask questions, keep an eye on the sustainability tag, and find ways to get involved, because I think there's so much more to be done. This is something that is very quickly an evolving community, and there's lots of room for people to innovate.
Yeah. Michael, any closing words here?
Yeah, check out the the sustainability group on Slack. Nothing like the power of the Drupal community. So it's probably the best place to get started. Issue queues for the items marked sustainability. I promise we won't mark every Gander tag, I was like, when you first said, I was like, oh, we're gonna mark everything sustainability. This is great. We won't do that. But yeah, I'm sure there's some opportunities on some existing issues, tag sustainability, that you could take advantage of. It's been fascinating. I really encourage people to dig into this more, because it's, as I've learned more about it and had these conversations, I found it really fascinating. So.
Cool. Well, I expect you all to join our sustainability birds of a feather session that sounds like we need at the DrupalCon Portland coming up, and look forward to having you all back on another future Tag1 Team Talk. Thank you again, gentlemen, for joining us tonight in some areas, and see you again.
Thanks
Thank
so
you very
much.
much.
Thank you.